in a recent open letter to President Obama on DC voting rights, you wrote, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton reflected your sentiments when she commented on the Egyptian uprising with the words, "We want to see free and fair elections. But in the District of Columbia, where you and Secretary Clinton reside, there are no free and fair elections for electing representatives with full voting rights to Congress. There is only the continual disenfranchisement, unique to all other national capital cities and purported democracies, for the hundreds of thousands of voting-age citizens in the District of Columbia." I think, Ralph Nader, a lot of people will be surprised to hear that residents of the District of Columbia are not full participants in the democracy in the United States of America.
For over 200 years, they haven't had the right that all other Americans have in the 50 states to elect their own voting representative and 2 senators. And here we have the President of the United States, who has campaigned in 2008 for voting rights for the District of Columbia, telling the Egyptian government that they should have free and open elections so the Egyptian voters can vote for their members of parliament. But here, where he lives, back in the district, he's silent. He has not used his political muscle in the last 2 years on Congress to get this bill through. And he's now witnessing the Republicans who dominate the House stripping Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton of the district of even her voting rights at the committee level where she serves in the House of Representatives. So now Congress rules over this colony called the District of Columbia. It can control its budget, distort its budget, overrule referenda that the voters in the district have passed, and in a variety of ways make the district taxpayers pay for all kinds of federal expenses, because the district operates as a city and the equivalent of a state services, and they don't get reimbursed enough by the federal government.
I read in, I think it was Colby King's recent article in the Washington Post, that I think 57% of the land in the District of Columbia is owned by the federal government.
Federal government and nonprofit groups. So there's a lot of property and land that are not on the tax rolls. Extraordinary amount of land that are not on the tax rolls. That's another burden, you see. And the people in the district don't have 2 senators and a representative to fight for them and fight for their interests. But just think of the crazy paradox where you got Obama and Clinton lecturing Obama. Just think of the crazy paradox. We have President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton, who are for, on paper at least, voting rights for Congress on behalf of the District of Columbia citizens, lecturing the Egyptian government to have open and fair elections. I mean, the hypocrisy is very, very thick here. And I urged him to invite 100 of the exuberant demonstrators in Cairo to come over here and be a focal point so that we can all get hundreds of thousands of people out around Lafayette Square and have the president speak to them and build the pressure on Congress so they can get their voting rights.
HIV/AIDS rates in the District of Columbia, I think if it's more than 1%, it's understood to be a generalized and severe epidemic. It's more than 3%. And if I'm not mistaken, Congress overruled needle exchange for years. So when we talk about statehood and the district's ability to write its own laws, the lack of it has cost a lot of lives.
Oh yes, the district is in very bad shape for a good proportion of the citizens. I mean, it has some of the worst poverty in the United States, the worst child poverty, high infant mortality, high HIV rates. Its housing is in a shambles in large parts of the district, and in other parts it's unaffordable. So, you know, 21st century District of Columbia still hasn't the rights that a lot of Americans got in the 18th century under our Constitution.
How does it fare compared to other capitals throughout the world?
No other capital in any country that claims to be a democracy disenfranchises, strips its residents of its capital city, like Brasilia or London, of the right to vote for representatives in their parliaments. Only the District of Columbia remains a colony.
In your open letter to the president, you discuss the possibility of a staggered general strike, whereby at the beginning of each month, district residents come to work 30 minutes later in the morning so that in 6 months they go to work at noon. Some employers, especially nonprofits and commercial concerns, with the sense of self-respect and human rights, may actually encourage such commitment and join with them.
Right. I think there needs to be a jolt. There needs to be a civic jolt, and I thought this would be a good one. So the first month, a large number of employers, maybe certainly many citizen group employers would say, okay, all you people working for us, come to work 30 minutes late. The second month, an hour. The third month, an hour and a half. Of course, this builds up awareness, even among many people who haven't been that aware of it. It makes news, headlines. It's a moral demonstration, and it might send a message to Congress and to Mr. Obama. Remember, 90% of the district voters voted for President Obama. So he's got his pledge in 2008 to get the vote for the District of Columbia. He's got 90% of the voters behind him. He had a Democratic Congress fully until January, and he didn't do anything. So there needs to be a civic jolt, and I was thinking this kind of modest general strike will really get people talking about it, and eventually get more people demonstrating in the streets.
And you contrast it to what's happening in Egypt, speaking of civic jolts.
Yeah, I think that President Obama spent more time on the Egyptian demonstrations and protests in the last 8 days than he has in over 2 years dealing with the District of Columbia's lack of voting rights for members of Congress.
Ralph Nader, you conclude by writing, so come home with your rhetoric, Mr. President. Come home to liberate your District of Columbia. What is your response? Any final thoughts you have as a long-time resident of the District of Columbia and a long-time fighter for civil rights?
I don't think he will respond. I'm not the only one who's written him many substantive letters over the last 2 years. Never responds. Never has anyone else respond. No assistants respond. No secretaries of departments respond. This is one of the most non-responsive presidents when it comes to communications from citizens that I've ever experienced. Jimmy Carter used to respond. He'd even sign the letters, but not Barack Obama.
That's striking, since he was elected by millions and millions of people who were expecting a break from what was a very secretive Bush-Cheney 8 years.
That's true, but there have been so many continuities in foreign policy, military policy, Wall Street bailout policy, and many others from the Bush administration into the Obama administration that I call the Obama administration the administration of Obama-Bush.
Thanks, Ralph Nader.
You're welcome.